The Dragon's Return, Chapter 11, Aithusa. Arthur raised an eyebrow when the knock at his door turned out to be Merlin. She never knocked. She also didn't tend to lock the doors after she entered. She strode across the room and sat down across from him, looking around to make sure they were alone.
"You're a little early for lunch,"
Arthur pointed out, setting down his papers. "I need to talk to you."
"I'm getting that."
"No." She looked up, stood to the open window and closed it, locking that as well. She stalked back over to the table and sat down again. "I need to talk to you."
"About?"
Arthur asked, raising an eyebrow. "Okay, look, you told me it was okay. You called my magic beautiful. But now we need to talk about something magical, and I don't know how to do that with you," Merlin admitted before standing and beginning to pace.
"Is it dangerous?"
he asked. She shook her head. "No, not if we do it right."
"Merlin, I am beyond pleased that you are feeling comfortable enough to come to me with this. But I need you to tell me what's actually happening,"
Arthur pointed out. Merlin took a deep breath. "I went to Gaius's last night because I couldn't sleep, and I wanted to talk to him about the council meeting next week, where we're discussing the incursions from Carlion that have been coming over the border. But he wasn't alone. He was talking to a man. He's got something called a Triskelion, which is supposed to be a map to the Tomb of Ascanar. But the last piece of it is in the vaults. Gaius told him to give it up, but he refused. He's staying at the Rising Sun," Merlin said in one very long rush.
"Okay. Why is this important? What's at the tomb?"
Arthur asked, folding his hands. The vaults had been stolen from before. He might have to beef up security. He'd only been king for a few months. It's an old legend. It might not even be true.
"What's in the tomb?"
"A dragon egg," Merlin said, eyes on her shoes. Arthur's eyes went wide. The implication was somewhat staggering. Merlin was the last dragon lord. There were only 2 dragons in the world. If this legend was true, if Merlin could hatch this dragon, there was a chance to save the species. Arthur folded his hands.
"How do you want to do this?"
he asked. "Do this? What do you mean, do this?"
"Do we need to confiscate the Triskelion from him? Should we talk to him? What do you want to do?"
Arthur asked. That depends entirely on where we are on your project." That was how they'd been referring to Arthur's planned reforms on the laws. It wasn't likely to be a fast project, as Uther had taken his laws very seriously. Arthur shook his head.
"Nowhere near ready. I can't lose the support of the lords. I need them on my side."
"I know. I have another plan, but you're going to have to trust me," Merlin said, standing and heading over to the drawer where he kept his keys when they were not on his belt.
"You know I trust you, Merlin."
"Good, because I'm going to help him steal the last piece of the Triskelion," she said, and he blinked, raising an eyebrow. Her plan was odd, to say the least, and he didn't love that it involved her getting smacked over the head, but a rumor, after the break-in, had Arthur, the Round Table, and Merlin on horseback tracking the thief. Oddly, Agravain had tried to talk them out of taking Merlin. "It might not be safe, sire. Who knows what this thief is capable of?" he'd argued. "All the more reason for me to go. I'm the physician's assistant. Better to have me on hand if I'm needed," she pointed out, mounting her horse, wearing her plate mail without the armored corset. Agravain had no argument for that one, and Arthur frowned as they raced out of Camelot. Well out of the city and away from prying eyes, Merlin pulled a map from a pouch on her belt. "You never did tell us what this thief stole," Lancelot pointed out, with a raised eyebrow. "Exactly what I wanted them to steal," Merlin said, pulling something else out of her belt. It was a purple crystal dangling on a chain. She spoke a word, her eyes glowed gold, and the crystal moved on its own accord, inching across the map. "This way," she said, pointing down a path. Handy, that," Gawain said with a grin. handier now I can actually use it, Merlin said, looking around as though she was worried someone would spring from the bushes to accuse her of treason.
It won't be like this forever,
Arthur promised. I know, she said with a slight smile. This particular adventure was not going particularly well. Percival had taken an arrow to the leg, and Arthur woke in the dawn hours of the next morning, feeling like he'd had a little too much ale the night before. But that made no sense. He pulled himself up and frowned. The rest of the knights were here, but...
Where's Merlin?
He demanded, shooting to his feet, ignoring his aching head. She wasn't there. The other knights were pulling themselves to their feet. Lancelot looked around. The tomb, he said. Leon nodded for them to go. He would look after Percival. They ran into the tomb, following the sounds of voices through the halls. You are nothing, the man was screaming. Merlin threw up a hand, sending him flying into a pillar. I am the last Dragon Lord, and you will leave this egg alone. Dragons belong to no one. If you had listened to me, you might have lived to see them return. She sounded a little sad as she turned from Borden's unmoving form to face the egg sitting on the pedestal. 2 nights later, they watched her hatch it. Apparently, the naming was what did it. A tiny white dragon, no bigger than a young kitten, stretched out of the egg to his new name, Aithusa. Arthur was inclined to agree with Kilgara for the first time. This was a good sign for them, for all of Camelot.